Have you ever stood at the edge of a choice, knowing it could change your whole life, even if nobody else believed in it? That's where Madison Miller, Maddie to the few who loved her, found herself on a burning July afternoon in the dusty heart of Texas, with only $5 crumpled in her pocket and hope flickering like heat on the horizon. Maddie was 9 years old, small for her age, but carrying the heavy silence of someone who'd lost too much, too soon. After her parents' mysterious deaths, a wound the town still whispered about, she lived with her grandfather, Walter Miller, in a sun-bleached clapboard house just beyond the railroad tracks. Walter, a retired Marine, ran his home with the discipline of an old drill sergeant but the hidden gentleness of someone who'd seen enough war to treasure every scrap of peace. On this particular Saturday, Maddie woke before dawn, nerves humming. She'd heard from her friend Becky that Tom Sanders, the town's infamous cheapskate and owner of a crumbling ranch, was selling whatever's left in the back to make ends meet. Maddie's allowance had burned a hole in her pocket all week. She'd convinced Grandpa Walter to take her just to look. He grumbled about flea-bitten chickens and rusted tractors, but Maddie could tell he was secretly glad to see her excited. The Sanders Ranch looked like it had fought a losing battle against time. The paint peeled off in scabby flakes, weeds strangled the fence posts, and even the air seemed tired. Maddie's sneakers crunched on gravel as she and Walter picked their way through busted lawnmowers, dented feed bins, and the leftover bones of somebody's hopes. But Maddie wasn't looking at any of that. Something called her toward the back, where the barn's shadow stretched long and cool. That's where she saw him, a German shepherd, chained so tight his fur was rubbed raw around his neck, sitting in a patch of dried mud like he'd given up on being noticed. He was huge, battered, all ribs and scars, with one ear flopped sideways and a right eye the color of whiskey. For a moment, Maddie just watched. She saw how he tracked her movement, tense but silent, every muscle ready to bolt if not for the iron chain. "Don't bother with that mutt," Tom Sanders called, wiping his hands on his filthy jeans as he strolled over. "Can't do nothing with him. Won't fetch, won't guard, won't even bark at the mailman. Last fella who tried to train him quit in 2 days. Dog's broken if you ask me." Walter snorted, crossing his arms. No such thing as a broken dog, just broken folks who give up on him. But he shot Maddie a look, part warning, part question. Was she sure about this? Maddie knelt in the dirt, ignoring the stench and the heat. She reached out slowly, the way her mom used to show her. The shepherd stiffened but didn't snap. Their eyes met, his full of hurt, hers stubborn with hope. In that quiet space, Maddie saw not a worthless mutt, but a survivor. Someone who knew what it meant to lose and still stayed alive. "How much for him?" Maddie asked, her voice almost swallowed by the cicadas. Tom shrugged. $5, or I take him to the pound Monday. Don't make no difference to me." Maddie's heart hammered. $5 was everything she had, saved for months from chores and birthday cards. She fished the crumpled bills from her pocket, hands shaking, and pressed them into Tom's palm before Grandpa Walter could object. "Deal," she said. "His name is Ranger." Tom laughed, already walking away. "Good luck, kid. You'll need it." Walter helped Maddie unclip the heavy chain. Ranger didn't bolt, but he didn't wag his tail either. He watched her, cautious, as if waiting for another shoe to drop. Walter knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You sure you want this, Maddie? Dogs are a big responsibility." She nodded. "I want him, Grandpa. I need him." Walter saw something fierce in her eyes and decided not to argue. They led Ranger to the truck, keeping him on a length of rope. The ride home was tense. Ranger huddled in the bed, eyes flicking everywhere, while Maddie sat in the back seat, twisting her hands. Walter watched them both in the mirror. Back at the Miller house, Maddie set up an old blanket and some water in the tool shed behind the house. She spent the afternoon sitting quietly with Ranger, humming old lullabies, reading from her favorite book, and offering bits of leftover chicken. At first, Ranger wouldn't come near, but as dusk painted the sky pink and gold, he crept forward, inch by inch, until his head rested beside her knee. Maddie stroked his fur, feeling every scar, every tremor. That night, as crickets chirped and the world softened, Maddie slipped out with a flashlight. She found Ranger curled on the blanket, eyes wide open, guarding against nightmares only he could see. She lay down beside him, careful and patient. It took a long time, but at last Ranger, with a sigh, laid his head against her arm and closed his eyes. In the darkness, a promise was made. She would protect him, and he would protect her, no matter what secrets the past might hold, or what dangers tomorrow might bring. It started with little things, the kinds of details only a watchful child and a seasoned Marine would notice. On the surface, Maddie's days with Ranger settled into a routine. Early mornings spent slipping him treats in the tool shed, afternoons learning the gentle rhythm of trust. But underneath, the summer air felt charged, like the sky before a storm. Ranger learned fast, too fast. In just a few days, he responded to every word Maddie taught him. Sit, stay, come, heal, without hesitation. But sometimes, he acted before she finished the command, his body tense, waiting for instructions Maddie didn't even know. One morning, Maddie was feeding him when a loud metallic clang from the neighbor's yard, someone dropping a wheelbarrow, sent Ranger instantly to attention. His head snapped up, ears rigid, eyes darting to the shed's door. He pressed against Maddie, almost shielding her, and didn't relax until the noise faded. That night, as Maddie ate dinner with Grandpa Walter, she couldn't stop talking about Ranger's tricks. Walter smiled, but there was something thoughtful in his eyes. After dinner, he walked out to the tool shed, lingering by the door. He watched Ranger move, silent, controlled, like a soldier on patrol. When Walter called, "Here, boy," in a sharp, commanding tone, Ranger's posture changed. He approached, alert, his gaze fixed not on Walter's face but on his hands, as if awaiting a hidden signal. Walter crouched, looking the dog over. He traced the scarred fur around Ranger's neck and checked his paws. "You've seen some action, haven't you?" he muttered. The dog didn't flinch. Later, in his living room, Walter thumbed through an old wooden box, the one marked with his Marine Corps medals and fading black and white photographs. He pulled out a creased envelope from a buddy who used to work with Project Dogs during his service. They were supposed to be legend, military animals trained far beyond ordinary K9s. Walter remembered stories of top-secret experiments and whispered warnings that stuck to his bones. He stared out at the Texas night, wondering. Over the next few days, Maddie noticed other strange behaviors. When she dropped a set of keys, Ranger froze. If someone in a uniform, mailman, the town's deputy, even a pizza delivery kid in a crisp polo, passed by the backyard fence, Ranger's body stiffened. He didn't bark, but he always positioned himself between Maddie and the perceived threat, his amber eyes alert and steady. One afternoon, while Maddie was brushing Ranger's coat in the tool shed, her friend Becky stopped by. Becky joked, "Bet your dog would make a great guard at Fort Knox." She clapped her hands twice, just playing, but Ranger leapt up, snapping to attention. Maddie stared, realizing the dog wasn't just smart. He was trained, and trained for something big. That night, Maddie tossed and turned. Shadows flickered across her ceiling as the wind rattled the old windows. She woke to a low, guttural growl from outside. Maddie crept to the tool shed, where Ranger stood rigid, nose pressed to the floorboards. He was digging, a frantic, desperate scratching that sent splinters flying. Maddie tried to soothe him, but he only paused long enough to nuzzle her hand before resuming his digging with wild urgency. By morning, Ranger had unearthed two things: a battered pair of dog tags and a jagged piece of metal embedded with circuitry, a half of a strange silver chip. Maddie turned the dog tags over, wiping away grime to reveal a string of numbers and letters that made no sense to her. The metal chip glinted in the sunlight, humming with a mystery she could almost feel in her bones. Maddie brought both treasures to Grandpa Walter at breakfast. He turned the dog tags over in his palm, jaw tightening as he read the inscription. "Unit 17, he whispered, more to himself than to Maddie. He stared at the chip, eyes narrowing, and for the first time since Maddie had come to live with him, he looked truly afraid. Walter excused himself after breakfast and made a call he hadn't thought he'd ever make again. "Jack," he said when a gravelly voice answered. "It's Walter. I've got something you need to hear." Jack Brooks, Walter's old army buddy and one of the few people Walter trusted with secrets, listened as Walter described Ranger's behaviors, the tags, the chip. Jack's voice turned grim. "Sounds like you got yourself a Project Sentinel ghost, Walt. Watch your back, and watch Maddie's." The next day, as the sun dipped behind storm clouds, Maddie stood at the window and watched a dark SUV drive slowly past their street. The car's tinted windows hid the driver's face. The SUV circled the block once, twice, moving like a predator scenting prey. Maddie's skin prickled. She hugged Ranger close, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Walter, watching from the porch, saw the SUV too. He stepped inside and locked the door. For the first time since Maddie's parents died, a cold weight of dread pressed on his chest. Whatever secrets Ranger carried, they had just put a target on the Miller family. And outside, somewhere in the growing dark, eyes were watching. The summer air in small-town Texas grew heavier by the day, as if every secret, every hushed warning clung to the shadows and pressed down on the Miller house. Maddie felt it most at night, when dreams tangled with reality and her heart pounded with questions she was too afraid to ask out loud. After finding the dog tags and strange metal chip, Walter decided it was time for answers. The next morning, he drove Maddie and Ranger into town. The excuse was simple. Ranger needs a checkup at the vet, but Maddie could sense the tension in Grandpa's voice. Walter rarely left things to chance, and she could tell he was worried, maybe more than he'd ever let on. The town veterinary clinic sat on Main Street, squeezed between the bakery and the hardware store. Dr. Grace Turner had a reputation as the most thorough vet in 3 counties, a gentle woman with quick eyes and a steady hand. She welcomed Maddie and Walter with a warm smile, but even she paused when she saw the battered German shepherd, his wary gaze and old scars. "What's his name?" Dr. Turner asked, kneeling to Ranger's level. "Ranger," Maddie said, her voice proud. "He's special." Dr. Turner ran a scanner over Ranger's neck, checking for a microchip. At first, nothing happened. She frowned, adjusted the scanner, and tried again, this time holding it a little lower, right above the old scar. A faint beep sounded, and Dr. Turner's eyes widened. "That's odd," she murmured, glancing at the small screen. "The chip's not registered. It's encrypted." She took Ranger into the back room for an X-ray, promising Maddie she'd be right out. Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, Dr. Turner returned, holding a printout and looking unsettled. She beckoned Walter and Maddie into her office and shut the door. "I found something unusual," Dr. Turner said, lowering her voice. "There's a second microchip, one I've never seen before. It's deep, embedded in the muscle. I ran a high-frequency scan and got this." She slid the printout across the table. On the page, a faint string of words flickered under the scan's glow. "Project Sentinel. Ranger Unit 17. Status, MIA." Walter stared at the words, the color draining from his face. Maddie's mind spun. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Dr. Turner hesitated. Project Sentinel was some kind of military experiment. Top secret. I only heard rumors, but they were working on super dogs for special operations. Dogs trained and enhanced far beyond normal K9S. If Ranger is one of them, he's not just a stray. Someone's going to be looking for him. Maddie felt the room tilt. She glanced down at Ranger, who sat calmly at her feet, as if the secrets swirling around him meant nothing at all. Back home, Maddie's dreams turned strange. That night, she fell asleep clutching Ranger's collar and drifted into a world that wasn't her own. In the dream, she was running through a cold, metal hallway, doors slamming behind her, alarms wailing. She heard men shouting in a language she couldn't understand. She smelled chemicals, fear, blood. Every sound made her heart race. She looked down and saw 4 paws instead of hands, felt the throb of a collar tight around her neck. Through Ranger's eyes, she saw the chaos of a lab escape, glimpses of other dogs and flickering red lights. A single phrase echoed over and over, as if branded on her mind. "Protect Madison." She woke gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, with Ranger pressed against her side. In the days that followed, Maddie grew obsessed with finding answers. She searched through boxes in the attic, pawing through her father's old notebooks and files, remnants of a life cut short by tragedy. One afternoon, as the light slanted gold through the dusty window, she found a folder marked with her father's handwriting, "Emergency Plans." Inside, tucked between engineering diagrams and coded notes, Maddie discovered blueprints for a device, a chip disabler, built from spare parts, with a handwritten note. "For Madison, if you ever need it." The realization hit her like a punch. Her father must have known about Ranger. He must have been involved, in ways she'd never imagined. That evening, Maddie gathered the courage to show Grandpa Walter what she'd found. She laid out the folder, the blueprints, the old dog tags, and the strange metal chip on the kitchen table. Walter sat in silence for a long time, hands trembling slightly as he traced the lines of his late son's handwriting. "Maddie," he said finally, his voice rough, "your dad wasn't just an engineer. He worked on classified tech for the Army. I never knew all the details, but he always told me there were things he did to keep people safe. If he left this for you, he must have known you'd find Ranger someday. Or maybe Ranger was meant to find you." They heard footsteps on the porch, Becky coming to borrow sugar, startled by the tension in the air. Walter quickly gathered the documents, locking them away. As Becky left, Maddie caught sight of a shadowy figure across the street, half hidden behind an oak tree. The person was gone in a blink, but the chill lingered. That night, as storm clouds rolled in and thunder shook the walls, Maddie realized she'd never felt both so protected and so afraid. Ranger pressed close, eyes reflecting lightning, his presence both comfort and warning. In the heart of the night, Maddie dreamed again, this time not of escape, but of standing guard. She heard her father's voice, faint and loving, blending with Ranger's silent promise. "Whatever happens, you are not alone. Protect Madison, always." And somewhere, far away, someone realized the ghost soldier they'd lost was awake and not alone anymore. The days after Maddie's discovery felt brittle, as if the world was waiting for something to snap. The sun kept blazing down on the faded paint of the Miller house, but shadows seemed to grow longer, thicker, especially around the tool shed where Ranger now slept each night. Ears pricked, nose twitching at every creak or whistle of wind. Maddie did her best to hide her growing fear. She'd tuck the blueprints and chip away every evening, lock her bedroom door, and try to act normal. But inside, she was counting the seconds between footsteps, measuring every glance out the window. It was on a Wednesday, sticky hot and buzzing with cicadas, that Maddie noticed the first real sign of danger. Two strangers appeared in town, dressed in crisp uniforms marked animal control, though nobody in the neighborhood recognized them. They carried clipboards and wore sunglasses even indoors, drifting from porch to porch asking about any recent sightings of stray dogs, particularly large German shepherds, maybe with military-style tags. Their voices were smooth and polite, but their eyes were always moving, taking in more than they let on. Walter spotted them from the living room window. He shut the blinds with a curse and turned to Maddie. "Listen close, kiddo. If anybody comes asking about Ranger, you keep your mouth shut. Let me do the talking." Maddie nodded, clutching Ranger's collar in her lap, the old dog tags tucked deep in her pocket. That night, the air felt charged. Walter called his old army buddy Jack Brooks and explained the situation in a low, tense voice. "Something's not right here, Jack. They're looking for him, for the dog." Jack, always steady, replied, "Hang tight, Walt. I'll head down first thing. Don't open that door to anybody you don't know." True to his word, Jack Brooks arrived at sunrise the next morning, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Maddie with a gentle nod, set his battered duffel bag by the door, and pulled Walter aside. "Show me what you've got." Together they reviewed Maddie's father's blueprints, the strange chip, and the letters hidden in the keepsake box. Jack's face tightened as he read the lines about Project Sentinel and protection protocols. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered. Jack's presence brought a rare sense of calm to Maddie. He told stories over breakfast about his days in the army, how the bravest soldiers were the ones who protected the vulnerable, even when it meant drawing fire themselves. Maddie soaked up every word, feeling a little braver just sitting at the table with him and Grandpa. But calm was always fleeting now. That evening, while Walter and Jack checked the locks and Maddie brushed Ranger in the tool shed, a sharp noise, glass breaking, shattered the silence. Maddie's heart lurched. She turned to see a shadowy figure forcing the tool shed door, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Ranger erupted with a snarl, hurling himself at the intruder. There was a brief, violent struggle. Shouts, heavy footsteps, a cry of pain. The figure staggered away, crashing through the bushes, but not before Maddie saw blood on Ranger's fur. Walter and Jack burst out the back door, flashlights and a baseball bat in hand. By the time they reached Maddie, the intruder was gone, leaving only torn footprints in the mud. Ranger limped back to her side, blood trickling from a shallow cut on his flank. Maddie dropped to her knees, shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding with her shirt. "Easy, sweetheart," Jack said, kneeling beside her. He pressed a clean handkerchief to Ranger's wound. "He'll be okay. Not too deep. But that was no animal control agent. He had a gun." Walter called Dr. Grace Turner, who arrived within minutes, carrying a first aid kit and grim determination. She patched Ranger up, but her hands shook. "If these people are after him, you can't stay here. Not anymore." As Ranger slept off the pain, Maddie searched for comfort in her mother's keepsake box. She found a bundle of letters, yellowed and soft with age. Carefully, she unfolded one addressed to her. "If you're reading this, It means Ranger has found you. Maddie's mother wrote about Project Sentinel, her fears for Maddie's safety, and her hope that Ranger would do what humans could not: protect her, always. Tears slipped down Maddie's cheeks as she read the last line: "Trust your heart, Maddie, and trust Ranger. He was made to love you." Later that night, Walter gathered everyone in the living room. The storm outside rattled the windows, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Maddie's chest. Jack spread out a map of the region, tracing escape routes and safe places. "We'll head up to my cabin in the mountains. No one knows it's there except me. We'll lay low until we figure this out." As the family packed in silence, Maddie hugged Ranger close, burying her face in his fur. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "We'll protect each other. I promise." Ranger looked up at her, eyes clear and loyal, and licked her hand, sealing the promise between them. When dawn broke, they left the Miller house behind, windows shuttered, secrets locked away, and shadows falling long across the empty yard. But Maddie felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting back, with love, with courage, and with the fierce, unbreakable bond she shared with the dog the world wanted to forget. And somewhere, deep in the morning hush, the hunt continued, relentless, closing in, and ready to test just how far a family's loyalty could truly reach. The mountain cabin was nothing like home, perched at the edge of a pine forest. It was half hidden from the narrow dirt road by thick tangles of brush. The air was cooler here, laced with the scent of rain-soaked earth and pine needles, but Maddie felt a different kind of chill. Each window was kept shuttered, every door double-locked. Jack's cabin had always been a safe place for him, a retreat from the world, but now it felt like a fortress under siege. The family settled into a nervous routine. Walter and Jack took turns keeping watch, walking the perimeter at dawn and dusk, rifles in hand. Maddie and Ranger stuck close together, Maddie helping with chores and making sure Ranger's injury was healing. She tried to act brave, but the silence of the woods and the lingering threat made her jump at every distant engine or snapping branch. One afternoon, Maddie was brushing Ranger on the porch when he began to pant heavily, legs trembling. His head drooped, and his body shook as if a fever burned inside him. Maddie called out in alarm. Walter and Jack rushed over. They laid Ranger on a blanket, checking his wound. But the cut had healed well. His symptoms were something else. Jack knelt, examining the dog's eyes. "He's shutting down," Jack murmured, voice grim. "This isn't from the injury. I've seen it before, with K9 units in the service, when their chips went bad or someone activated a failsafe." Walter's jaw tightened. "A kill switch? You're saying the chip is programmed to terminate him if he's compromised," Jack finished, not bothering to sugarcoat it. "It could be triggered remotely. Whoever's after Ranger, if they realized he's gone, they might have set it off." Maddie's heart plummeted. She felt helpless as Ranger's breathing grew more ragged, his eyes glazing over. He whimpered quietly, a sound that ripped through Maddie like a knife. Walter put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but even he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. The next hours passed in frantic searching and whispered arguments. Maddie, refusing to leave Ranger's side, pored over her father's blueprints for the chip-disabling device. Pages were covered in careful handwriting and sketched diagrams, a tangle of wires, circuit boards, and handwritten notes. Maddie's hands shook as she followed the instructions, gathering parts from Jack's toolboxes and the junk drawers in the cabin. Jack and Walter argued in the kitchen. It's too risky, Walter insisted. We don't even know if it'll work. We could fry his brain, lose him forever. What's the alternative? Jack snapped. Let him die? You saw what those people are capable of. This might be the only shot he's got. Maddie tuned them out. She remembered her father's note. For Madison, if you ever need it. She was the only one who could make the choice. She owed Ranger everything. Their bond, their trust. He wasn't just a project, or a weapon, or a casualty in someone else's war. He was her friend. With the prototype assembled, Maddie, Walter, and Jack knelt beside Ranger. Maddie explained the dilemma in a trembling voice. If I use this, it might erase his memories, maybe even the bond we have. But if I don't, he might not make it. She looked into Ranger's eyes, searching for the loyal companion she loved. His gaze met hers, tired but unwavering. Walter squeezed Maddie's shoulder. No matter what, you have to do what's right. Sometimes the hardest love is the bravest kind. Jack handed Maddie the small device, already wired and primed. You decide, Maddie. You're his person. Tears streaming down her face, Maddie nodded. She pressed the device to Ranger's collar, taking a deep, shaking breath. You saved me, she whispered. Now it's my turn. Ranger's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment everything in the world went silent. A gentle hum filled the air as Maddie pressed the button. The device vibrated, sending a pulse through the metal chip buried in Ranger's neck. The dog tensed, legs jerking, mouth pulled back in a silent snarl. Hattie held him, whispering soothing words, trying to steady her own heart as the device completed its cycle. Finally, Ranger collapsed against her, limp and unmoving. Maddie sobbed into his fur, terrified she had made the wrong choice. Walter knelt on one side, Jack on the other, each resting a comforting hand on Maddie's back. The device clattered to the floor, its purpose spent. The next few minutes dragged on with unbearable slowness. Maddie refused to let go, clutching Ranger's body as if her love could anchor him to the world. Please come back, she whispered, over and over. I'm right here. I'm not giving up on you. Outside, the sun dipped behind the mountains, shadows stretching across the porch. A sense of finality settled over the cabin, heavy and still. For the first time since Maddie had brought Ranger home, she was truly afraid that love alone wouldn't be enough. Walter drew her close, voice low but firm. You did what you had to do, Maddie. Real courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about loving enough to try, even when you don't know how it'll end. Jack stood by the window, watching the long driveway for any sign of danger, but all was quiet. Night descended slowly, wrapping the cabin in a hush broken only by Maddie's soft cries and the ticking of the old kitchen clock. Hours passed, with Maddie kneeling beside Ranger, stroking his fur, whispering memories only the two of them shared. As the moon rose, Maddie finally drifted into a restless sleep, her hand resting protectively on Ranger's side. And in the stillness of that mountain night, no one knew if the dog who had saved them all would ever wake again, or if, when he did, he would remember the girl who refused to let him go. For the first time since Maddie could remember, the mountain cabin felt like a tomb. The wood-paneled rooms, usually echoing with Jack's steady footsteps and Grandpa Walter's old country tunes, fell silent except for the faint, labored breathing of Ranger as he lay unmoving on a nest of blankets. Days bled together. Outside, summer storms rolled down the mountains, thunder cracking above the roof, but nothing could drown out Maddie's fears or the ache in her chest. Ranger had been unconscious for 2 days. Maddie hardly left his side, her eyes raw from crying, hope fraying with each slow, shallow breath he took. She fed him water from a dropper and stroked his fur, whispering secrets, jokes, even songs her mother once sang. But Ranger didn't stir. The room was thick with that waiting silence, the kind that makes every clock tick sound like a drumbeat. Walter and Jack tried to keep Maddie's spirits up, but there was little they could say. The waiting was torture. Walter found her on the third night, curled beside Ranger on the floor, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He sat down with a sigh, joints cracking. "You know," he began softly, "when I was in the Marines, there was a dog named Rex. He saved my life more than once. But the bravest thing he ever did was let me say goodbye, even when I wasn't ready." Maddie pressed her face into Ranger's fur, voice muffled. "I can't let him go, Grandpa. Not yet. What if he never wakes up?" Walter's eyes glistened as he pulled Maddie close. "Loyalty isn't about holding on when things are easy. It's about loving enough to let go if that's what they need." He hesitated, voice rough. "You gave Ranger a chance no one else would. No matter what happens, that love matters." Jack drifted in and out, keeping busy, making calls to old contacts, checking the news, even driving into town for supplies. He returned one evening with a grave expression. "There's been talk, an article in the local paper about a brave girl and her dog. The story's spreading, the government's nervous. There's pressure not to make a move, not with so many eyes watching." He ruffled Maddie's hair, his smile a little forced. "You started something, kid. People are rooting for you. And for Ranger." But the hope that glimmered in his words couldn't break Maddie's despair. She began to draw, filling her sketchbook with pictures of Ranger, running in the field, sleeping under her bed, chasing butterflies, always by her side. She taped the pictures to the cabin walls, as if the act of creation might keep him with her. In each drawing, Ranger looked strong and alive. Maddie poured every hope, every memory into those pages. 3 days turned into 4. The world outside moved on, but inside the cabin, time stalled. Maddie barely slept. When she did, she dreamed of Ranger, running down endless corridors, barking for her to follow, always just out of reach. Each morning she woke gasping, reaching out for his warm fur. Walter and Jack tried to distract her, sharing stories and making pancakes for dinner. But Maddie only picked at her food, always glancing back at the corner where Ranger lay. On the 5th night, a fierce storm battered the cabin, rattling the windows and sending pine needles skittering across the porch. Maddie sat up late, staring into the dark, the wind howling like a wounded animal. She finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she curled up beside Ranger, clutching his collar. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice shaking. "I wanted to save you. I didn't want to lose you. But maybe I was selfish. Maybe the hardest love is letting you rest." She pressed her forehead to his. "If you can hear me, Ranger, it's okay. You don't have to fight for me anymore." Walter stood in the doorway, unseen, watching the scene with a heavy heart. He stepped outside into the storm, face turned to the rain, old memories swirling in his mind. Sometimes, he thought, love is about bearing witness, about staying by someone's side, no matter how much it hurts. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting warm gold across the living room. Maddie slept fitfully, still clutching Ranger. Jack read the news quietly, eyebrows lifting as he scanned his phone. "Looks like the government's pulling back," he said. "There's too much press. They don't want the heat." Walter nodded, but neither man smiled. It didn't matter if the world left them alone, not if Ranger didn't come back. Maddie finally stirred, her head aching, body exhausted. She sat up, wiping her face, and gazed down at Ranger. For the first time in days, she thought she saw his paw twitch, just the barest movement, almost imaginary. Her breath caught. "Grandpa!" she cried, hope flaring. Walter hurried over, eyes wide. Ranger's breathing hitched, his ears twitched. Slowly, as if waking from the deepest sleep, he lifted his head. His eyes blinked open, searching the room, lost for a moment, then landing on Maddie. Something in him recognized her, even if it was only the faintest spark. Maddie burst into sobs, this time tears of relief. She wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck, holding him as if she'd never let go. Walter knelt beside them, hands shaking with gratitude. Jack let out a long, trembling sigh, turning away to hide the moisture in his eyes. No one spoke. They didn't need to. For in that quiet, golden morning, Maddie knew the truth. Love can't always heal every wound, but it can bring you back from the edge, even when hope is all you have left. And for the first time since the chase began, Maddie felt something deeper than fear. She felt faith. Faith that whatever came next, she and Ranger would face it together. Ranger's awakening felt like a miracle, but for Maddie, it was only the start of another uncertain chapter. When he first lifted his head, blinking at the morning light, she hardly dared to breathe. It was as if the world itself was holding still, waiting to see if he'd truly returned. Walter sat on the floor beside her, silent, his large hand resting on Maddie's trembling shoulder. Jack leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, not hiding the tears in his eyes. For a long while, Ranger just lay there, weak but breathing, his eyes slowly tracking across the familiar faces. Maddie saw something different now, an openness, a gentleness, and a question in his gaze, as if searching for answers himself. When she whispered his name, he flinched at first, then pressed his nose into her palm. His tail moved just once, slow and uncertain. Maddie laughed and sobbed all at once, feeling the world tilt back into color. That day passed in a blur of relief, cautious hope, and quiet celebration. Walter and Jack set up a bed for Ranger in the living room so Maddie could watch him every second. Jack built a little ramp for him to get up and down the porch, joking, "A hero like you deserves the best." Walter called Dr. Turner, who hurried up the mountain as soon as she could. She checked Ranger's vitals and was amazed at his progress, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's like he's been given a whole new life," she said softly, petting his head. But Maddie saw the changes too. Ranger was still Ranger. He followed her around the cabin, curled at her feet, and whined softly when she left the room. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The old tension in his body was gone. He didn't snap to attention at sharp noises, didn't flinch at the sight of uniforms or metallic objects. When Jack dropped a toolbox, Ranger only watched, curious but calm. When a neighbor stopped by in hunting camo, Ranger simply sniffed the air and settled back down. "He's free," Maddie whispered to Walter that evening, watching Ranger sleep by the fireplace. "He's not haunted anymore." Walter squeezed her hand, pride and relief shining in his weathered face. "You gave him that, Maddie. You set him free." The story of Maddie and Ranger quickly spread beyond the mountain. News of the miracle dog and the brave girl who saved him captured hearts all over town, then beyond. The local paper ran an article with a photo of Maddie hugging Ranger, his bandaged flank peeking out beneath a bright red bandana. The headline read, "Saved by Love, Girl's Faith Brings Lost Soldier Back Home." People stopped by the cabin to leave treats, flowers, and cards. Some were wary, whispering about the government dog, but most offered only support and admiration. One afternoon, Jack hammered a homemade sign into the front yard. "Ranger, family, hero, friend." Neighbors honked their horns in approval as they drove past. For the first time, Maddie didn't feel like she had to hide anymore. Dr. Turner, moved by Ranger's journey, wrote a long letter to the National Rescue Dog Foundation, describing how a girl's courage and a dog's loyalty had brought hope to an entire community. She sent photos, Ranger's story, and a plea for more support for rescue animals and the families who take them in. Days later, the foundation called with an invitation for Maddie and Ranger to be special guests at their annual event in Dallas. Life at the cabin began to settle into something like normal, though normal now meant being a little bit famous. Maddie returned to school, where her classmates peppered her with questions. Some kids asked if Ranger could do tricks or had superpowers. Others wanted to know what it felt like to save a life. Maddie answered honestly, "I just did what anyone would do for their best friend." Walter and Jack found themselves drawn deeper into the community. Walter, once content to keep to himself, started volunteering at the local Veterans Center, sharing Ranger's story with other former soldiers struggling with their own scars. He noticed how people listened more intently, how even the most stoic vets softened when Ranger visited, letting the big dog nuzzle their hands or sit by their chairs. Jack, inspired by Ranger's transformation, began leading workshops on animal therapy for PTSD. He shared what he'd seen, how a rescued dog could become more than a pet, could become a healer, a partner, a reminder that no one is truly alone in their battles. People came from towns away to attend his classes, some bringing their own troubled dogs, others simply looking for hope. As for Maddie, she poured her heart into a school project about loyalty and second chances. When it was her turn to present, she stood at the front of her classroom, hands shaking but voice steady. Ranger lay beside her, calm as ever, his badge-shaped tag shining under the classroom lights. "My dad once said that loyalty means standing by someone, no matter how hard it gets," Maddie told her classmates. "Ranger never gave up on me, even when the world turned upside down. I think everyone deserves a second chance. And sometimes, what you're really saving is yourself." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. When she finished, her teacher wiped away a tear. Ranger stood, gave a little bark, and the class burst into applause. That night, as Maddie drifted off to sleep, Ranger curled beside her bed. She felt a peace she'd never known before. The world outside still held dangers and questions, but here in this patchwork family built by love and courage, she knew they'd face anything together. And for the first time, Maddie believed in beginnings, true, brave, and brand new. It started with a single story in the local paper, a photo of Maddie, all freckles and hope, clutching Ranger in her arms. Within a week, their story was everywhere, on TV and newspapers, splashed across the internet with headlines like, "Texas Girl Saves Ex-Military Dog from Secret Government Program." The phones at the Miller house and Jack's cabin rang off the hook. Reporters camped on Main Street, hoping for a glimpse of the miracle dog and his young guardian. Maddie never expected to be famous. She felt shy when the first TV crew arrived, cameras and microphones crowding her porch. But Walter stepped in as her shield, setting clear boundaries. "Your guests here," he told them. "You treat Maddie and Ranger with respect, or you leave." Jack stayed close, his watchful eyes keeping everyone honest, and Ranger, ever loyal, sat at Maddie's feet, quiet but ready. To Maddie's surprise, most people were kind. Cards, toys, and hand-drawn pictures of Ranger arrived in the mail every day. Children from all over the country wrote letters. "Dear Maddie, thank you for saving Ranger. I want to be brave like you." Teachers assigned her story for class projects. Veterans from distant states sent medals and notes of support, their words trembling with gratitude and memories of their own loyal dogs. National media picked up the story. On a sunny Saturday, Maddie, Walter, and Jack appeared on Good Morning America, sitting together on a velvet couch in a studio filled with lights and bustling producers. Ranger, freshly groomed and wearing a blue scarf, charmed everyone by resting his massive head on Maddie's lap and closing his eyes as if the cameras didn't matter. Maddie spoke softly, but with a confidence she didn't know she had. "He's not just a hero. He's my family." Questions came from everywhere. Was Ranger really part of a secret government program? How did you know to trust him? What's it like being famous? Maddie answered honestly, "I just listened to my heart, and I think everyone deserves a second chance." Walter spoke as well, sharing the lessons he'd learned about love, trust, and the cost of secrets. Jack talked about service dogs, about the silent wounds of war, and how animals could heal where medicine couldn't. Back home, the world's attention brought both hope and worry. The government, now wary of a public outcry and potential lawsuits, quietly ended the search for Ranger. Officials sent bland statements to the press. "We are investigating. No comment at this time." But behind the scenes, Jack's sources confirmed that the Miller family was no longer being watched. Maddie's story had forced powerful people into the light, and they didn't want any more questions. Maddie's life began to change. She and Ranger were invited to events all over Texas: dog rescue fundraisers, school assemblies, veterans parades. At every event, Maddie told her story, always starting with the day she spent her last $5 on a battered old dog chained behind a broken-down ranch. People listened, some wiping away tears, others smiling with pride. Walter found new purpose as well. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter, training troubled dogs and helping veterans find four-legged companions. He discovered that Ranger's story inspired others: soldiers who'd lost their way, families struggling to trust again, children scared to believe in second chances. Jack launched workshops on animal therapy for PTSD, using Ranger as a living example of the difference a rescued dog could make. Dr. Grace Turner became something of a celebrity herself. She wrote articles about the bond between humans and animals, about the ethical responsibility of science and how love could overcome even the most complicated history. She received invitations to speak at universities and conferences, but always returned home to help her patients, canine and human alike. Through it all, Maddie stayed humble. She didn't care about being famous, but she loved that Ranger could help others. One afternoon, her school invited her to speak at a special assembly. Maddie, nervous but determined, walked onto the stage with Ranger beside her. She looked out over hundreds of faces, classmates, teachers, parents, and strangers, and took a deep breath. "Ranger was just a stray when I found him. People said he was dangerous, that he was broken, but he wasn't. He was just scared, like a lot of us are sometimes. When you give someone a second chance, when you choose to trust and to love even when it's hard, you change everything. Not just for them, but for yourself." The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Maddie smiled through tears, looking down at Ranger. He wagged his tail as if to say, "We did it." As weeks passed, the story of Maddie and Ranger became part of the fabric of the town, a legend told in classrooms, at the dinner table, and around campfires. Their courage inspired others to adopt, to foster, to believe that anyone could be a hero, no matter how small or scared or alone they felt. At the cabin, life took on a new rhythm. Ranger, stronger every day, helped Walter with chores, greeted visitors, and napped in the sun. Maddie worked on new drawings, her sketchbook now filled with scenes of hope: rescue dogs finding homes, soldiers hugging their new companions, and a girl and her dog always side by side. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Walter hung a new sign by the road: Home of Ranger and Maddie. Family, heroes, and friends always welcome. As neighbors walked by, they smiled and waved. And for Maddie, that welcome meant more than any headline ever could. Months passed, but the story of Maddie and Ranger did not fade away. In fact, as fall colored the Texas hills with gold and crimson, their legend only grew deeper, woven into the conversations and quiet moments of the town, and well beyond. Yet for Maddie, the real changes were less about the cameras and more about what she felt inside. Healing, she was learning, was not a straight line. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, sometimes leaving her gasping for air, and sometimes lifting her high above everything she thought she knew. In the evenings, Maddie liked to sit with Ranger on the front porch, a blanket across her knees, her sketchbook in hand. She drew not just the good days, but also the hard ones. Ranger's first steps after the chip was disabled, Grandpa Walter holding her hand when she cried, Jack sitting quietly with his coffee, lost in old memories. She drew the shadows too, the worry in her mother's letters, the fear in Ranger's eyes, the black SUV that haunted her dreams. Each picture was a step in learning to accept every part of their story, not just the ending everyone loved. One crisp October night, the town hosted a community gathering at the library, Stories That Heal. Maddie, nervous but determined, was asked to share her story. She wore her best jeans and a sweater her mother had knitted long ago, and walked to the front of the room with Ranger at her side. The faces in the crowd blurred together, neighbors, classmates, even the mayor, but Maddie found strength in Ranger's steady presence. She began, "People like to say our story is about bravery, but I think it's about trust. Trusting each other, trusting yourself, and sometimes trusting that things will get better even when you can't see how." She paused, breath catching. Ranger and I both lost a lot. My parents, his freedom. There were days when I felt like the shadows would swallow me up. But Grandpa Walter told me, "You're not meant to carry everything alone." And he was right. Sometimes you have to let other people help you, even if it's scary. The room was silent, a hush broken only by the soft sighs of people remembering their own losses. Walter, sitting in the front row, was next to speak. His voice, once stern and gruff, carried a gentler tone these days. "I spent years thinking the only way to be strong was to fight my battles alone. The Marines taught me discipline, but it took Maddie and Ranger to show me that true courage is letting others in, letting them see you're hurt, letting them love you anyway." His eyes shone as he looked at Maddie and Ranger, and for a moment, the old soldier seemed young again. Jack joined the conversation, sharing what he'd learned since coming to the cabin. "I thought I was just coming to help an old friend, but I found a family instead. I saw how science and loyalty could clash, and how forgiveness makes space for healing. We've all got secrets, some of them heavy, some of them hidden so deep we forget they're even there. But facing them together, that's how we start to heal." Dr. Grace Turner, who had been quietly listening, added her own voice. "There are some wounds medicine can't touch. Wounds from war, from loss, from growing up too fast. Ranger and Maddie reminded us all that healing is slow and uneven. You'll have setbacks. Some days the best you can do is just keep breathing. But with trust, patience, and compassion, you find your way back." As the evening wore on, the event became less of a speech and more of a conversation. People shared their own struggles. A mother who lost her son overseas, a young veteran haunted by nightmares, a boy who'd never had a dog until Maddie's story gave him courage to adopt one. The library, usually a place of quiet study, was filled with voices, some trembling, some bold, all searching for connection and understanding. Afterward, Maddie stood outside, looking up at the stars. Ranger leaned against her, warm and solid. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she whispered, scratching behind his ear. She thought about her parents, about the secrets they carried, and wondered if they would be proud. She hoped they would see not just the girl who was saved, but the girl who chose to save in return. Walter joined her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "You know, Maddie, life will always have shadows, but the way you face them, the way you bring others into the light, that's what changes the world." Maddie nodded, her heart full. It's not about forgetting the past. It's about learning from it and moving forward, together. A few days later, Jack and Dr. Grace invited the town to a special forum, an open discussion about the ethics of science, loyalty, and forgiveness. They asked hard questions. What makes a family? How much should we trust technology with our hearts? Can we ever truly leave the past behind? Or does it shape us forever? Maddie listened, sometimes confused, sometimes inspired. But mostly, she was proud that her story and Ranger's could help spark such deep, important conversations. At home, life moved at a gentler pace. Maddie drew, Walter told stories, Jack cooked elaborate meals, and Ranger napped in every sunbeam he could find. The cabin rang with laughter, sometimes with tears, but always with love. Healing, Maddie realized, wasn't about erasing scars. It was about finding people who would love you, scars and all. On a quiet Sunday morning, Maddie found Ranger sitting by the porch steps, watching the sunrise. She sat beside him, the world new and quiet, and whispered, "Thank you for saving me, Ranger. I promise, I'll spend my whole life trying to save others, too." Ranger leaned into her, and the world, shadows and all, felt exactly right. A year had passed since Maddie spent her last $5 to rescue a battered German shepherd chained behind Tom Sanders' ranch. In that time, both girl and dog had transformed, no longer haunted, no longer afraid. Together with Walter, Jack, and Dr. Grace, they'd built something stronger than safety, a family woven from second chances and brave hearts. Now, spring had returned to Texas, and with it, a new tradition, the first annual Heroes and Hounds Festival. Maddie woke to the sound of laughter and music drifting in through her window. The old Miller place and Jack's mountain cabin, once fortresses against fear, had become the heart of the celebration. Colorful banners fluttered between oak trees. Booths lined the front yard, each raising money for animal rescues or supporting veterans organizations. The townspeople poured in from miles around, families with excited children, veterans in worn ball caps, dogs of every shape and size pulling on their leashes. Walter was up at dawn, directing volunteers, his marine voice booming over the crowd. Jack manned the grill, flipping burgers and telling stories to anyone who'd listen. Dr. Grace coordinated a pet adoption tent, matching eager dogs with new families. Maddie, in a blue t-shirt that read "Second Chances Start Here," greeted guests with Ranger at her side. He wore his own vest, labeled hero and friend, and accepted every pat, hug, and treat with calm dignity. There were games for kids, a pie-eating contest, and even a best rescue dog parade led by Ranger himself. When Maddie stepped up to the microphone for her speech, the crowd quieted. The breeze lifted her hair as she looked out at all the faces, some familiar, some brand new, and at the dogs, each one a living testament to hope. When I first met Ranger, he was scared and alone. I was too. People told me he was too broken to save, but I didn't believe that. What I've learned is that everyone deserves a second chance. Whether you're a person or a dog, it's love and loyalty that make a family, not blood, not secrets, not where you come from. I hope everyone here leaves today, knowing you can be a hero just by loving someone enough to stand by them, no matter what. The applause was thunderous. Ranger barked in agreement, and Maddie beamed with pride. That afternoon, the town mayor surprised Maddie and Ranger with a proclamation. For extraordinary courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and her dog, let today and every first Saturday of spring be known as Heroes and Hounds Day. Tears shone in Walter's eyes as he hugged Maddie, and even Jack was caught wiping at his face. As the sun slid lower, Maddie wandered the festival, greeting families and catching up with friends. She met a little boy named Henry, his arm in a cast, who had been afraid of dogs since a bad accident. With Maddie's gentle encouragement and Ranger's patient calm, Henry finally reached out and let Ranger lick his hand. Henry's mother smiled through tears, whispering, "Thank you. You gave him hope." Maddie understood, in that moment, that every story mattered, even the quiet ones, the ones still in progress. The festival ended with a candlelit vigil for rescue animals and veterans lost to war. Walter read the names of his friends who never made it home, his voice trembling with love and loss. Jack spoke about redemption, about how even the darkest moments could lead to new beginnings. Dr. Grace shared stories of dogs who'd healed broken hearts. Maddie stood with Ranger, candle flickering in the dusk, and felt the truth settle in her bones. Healing wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing to hope again, no matter how many times the world tried to break you. In the weeks that followed, Maddie and Ranger became advocates for rescue animals and kids in need. Together with Walter and Jack, they started new programs, support groups for older veterans, therapy dog visits to hospitals, workshops on animal care, and compassion for local schools. Ranger, once a project dog marked for destruction, became the gentle giant that everyone trusted, the dog who'd survived so much, now bringing hope wherever he went. Walter found new purpose running his support group for veterans, listening to stories he once would have bottled up. Jack's therapy dog program flourished, with Ranger as its mascot and Maddie its youngest, fiercest volunteer. Even Dr. Grace found herself changed. She'd started a scholarship for young women who wanted to become veterinarians, inspired by Maddie's courage and kindness. On warm spring evenings, Maddie and Ranger would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the pines. Sometimes Walter would join them, telling old Marine stories until they were all laughing. Sometimes Jack and Dr. Grace would stop by, arms full of food and good cheer. The porch became their place, a quiet sanctuary where they could just be, no secrets, no fears, only the deep, easy comfort of belonging. One night, as the sky faded to violet and gold, Maddie rested her head against Ranger's. "We made it, buddy," she whispered, tears slipping free, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. "We really made it." Ranger nuzzled her hand, his eyes full of gentle wisdom. He wasn't protecting her because of a command or a chip, not because he'd been programmed to obey, but because love, once freely given, had made them both new. The lesson was simple, and it belonged to everyone. Family is more than blood. It's the courage to love, the wisdom to let go, and the strength to trust, even after everything seems lost. As darkness settled over the Texas hills, Maddie understood that this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new legacy, a promise that, no matter what shadows might fall, there would always be light, as long as someone was brave enough to love.